Hey everybody, it's Kneecap here, and Rep Paladins might need to be heading to a jewelry store here with patch 10.1.5 as the Earnog ring has now been nerfed as well. So if you're a high-end raider especially, you probably worked really hard to get an Earnog ring if you could. It was from the first boss, so it could come into your vault pretty easy. A good amount of people have this ring. If you don't have it, then this doesn't pertain to you as much, and you could probably only watch the Onyx Amulet video I did. But the Onyx Amulet is getting nerfed. I call it Amulet. The Onyx Amulet is getting nerfed, and so is now the Earnog ring as well. So with this, essentially, if you want to do the most damage you can, you're going to be wearing 2 regular rings. Now, of course, these rings are very powerful. They were doing a good amount of damage for us with their extra stuff. So how do we make up for that? Well, they did give us a 2% buff to make up for the Onyx Amulet nerf. However, there is no compensation buff for the Earnog ring. So I already knew it was going to be a slight buff for high-end players with the Onyx Amulet going away. But with the Earnog ring, I never fully really dove deep into it because it was kind of obvious it was going to be a slight increase for a very high-end player. Very high eye-level player, I should say. It was going to be a slight increase. But with the Earnog ring, I wanted to take a look at it and dive a little bit deeper into it here. And we can see your Raidbot's profile up. Let's go ahead and look at the rings real quick. So here are the rings, the Seal of Daenerys Chosen and Onyx Amulet. So both of these are getting nerfed to the point where they're no longer going to be your best option anymore. And you know, the Daenerys Chosen, 25% is a lot, but it wasn't doing like a ton of damage. But with that extra damage going down, you know, you get more stats, more stamina by putting on another ring. And so the other ring's probably going to surpass that, even if it's only by a little bit. It is what it is, right? So it is going to be better to put on a bigger ring. However, you know, if you don't really care and you wanted to finish out the patch with this ring on, you certainly could. But you do have the option of putting on a higher eye level ring. Now, how are we going to do this? Now, like I said, for a high eye level player, you're still going to get a slight buff with the 2% damage increase. And we'll talk about why that is in a little bit. But if you are like a heroic level player, so, you know, 11 to 15 keys, mostly heroic raid, stuff like that. Maybe you have a couple, maybe you did some 16s and stuff, but you mostly stick in that heroic level. It's probably going to be a slight nerf to you. Maybe you draw even, but probably a slight nerf to you unless you have, you know, again, access to craft or something, these high rings. And if you're just a casual player or a normal raider and all that kind of stuff, then this will, of course, be a nerf to you overall if you're running these 2 things. However, if you're a casual player, there's probably a low chance that you have a mythic Seal of Daenerys Chosen anyways. So that part might not affect you very much. So those are the 2 rings. They're getting nerfed. So I do not have currently a 447 ring. I never prioritized ring in my vault. And once I learned about the Onyx Amulet, I haven't gotten a ring for my vault. I do have a ring from earlier in the season that I took just because it was the only thing worth taking for Mythic Plus in my vault. But it's only 441. And then I have a 437 ring just from a run that I did. And those are my 2 ring options. Now that would not be as good for me as having, you know, 447 rings. Now luckily there are 2 447 rings that you can craft if it does come to that for you. If you do not have other rings to put on and you have access to enchanted aspect crests, you can craft Signet of Titanic Insight, and you can craft the ring bound hourglass, and you're also able to put your own stats on those, which is really, really nice. So for me, I'm already at like almost 30% crit, so I'm going to put haste verse on both of these. I am adding socket to this because I will eventually have socket on them. They won't have socket immediately. It'll still end up being a buff, but not quite as much even without the sockets. But I would be having sockets on these at least eventually. So this is something you can do. Now, why is this still a buff? So here you can see a simulation, single target, Crusading Strike auto attack, and this is just for my setup. You know, I don't have Windwalker buff, but I think that's about it. So if you have Windwalker buff, you might be, even if you have the same like gear as me, you might be a little bit higher. So this is my single target simulation, and then this is my single target simulation with the rings changed. I just switched those around with the rings changed to 2 crafted rings, right? So the Ringbound Hourglass and Insignia of Titanic Insight with haste first, haste enchanted, whatever on them. So you can see it's a minus 1,000 DPS. Now you might just be able to really easy say, well, if it's minus 1,000 DPS and you're getting a 2% buff, that's clearly going to be more than 1,000. And you would be correct in that. That's a fair assumption to make. However, it is important to note, and the thing that I did not deep dive on is it's our ability damage that's getting buffed by 2%. Not all your damage. Your trinket damage isn't getting buffed by 2%. Your Ashkendir damage isn't getting buffed by 2%. Your Shadow Flame damage isn't getting buffed by 2%. Your ability damage is getting buffed by 2%. And unless I'm wrong on this, that means like your Paladin abilities are getting buffed by 2%. And so what I did was I went ahead and went through the actual report, and I looked at the actual ability damage and came up with the DPS. And that number ended up being 105,000 roughly, and then a 2,000 plus 2,000 DPS on the 2% then. A little over 2,000 because it's just a little over 100,000. Pretty simple math there. So, it'll be a net gain for me once I get the sockets on. It'll be a net gain of about 1,000 DPS for single target. So like I said, it'll be a buff for the highest end players that have access to the 447 ring. However, if you don't have access to it, like I said, if you aren't going to have 447 rings, even if they are like 441 with good stats, I didn't actually go through and simulate it, but I imagine it'll be pretty much breaking even for you. So you shouldn't feel a nerf. And I think a lot of people can get 441, I hope at least, things. And then you could be even. Now, we're also in a little bit of another predicament. Not a huge one, but a little one. So we're set up to get, Jewel. It actually works out kind of perfectly. As long as you did not buy a splintered spark here. Let's go into the vault room real quick, because you might not know this. So they added this to the vault. You can actually buy a splintered spark now for your vault tokens or whatever, and that allows you to get a spark every single week, because you get half a spark from doing the loam stuff, and then you get half a spark from this. So I did not do that. So I have my half a spark from doing the loam stuff this week. I'll get half a spark next week. That'll put me at 1 full spark, and then 2 more half sparks puts me at another full spark. So even if I don't buy any from that guy, I'll have 2 sparks, full sparks, to craft 2 rings on that day. Now it might end up being where I just do buy one anyways, just to kind of get it done and get it over with or whatever before then. Especially if there's nothing good in the vault. Although buying a socket for those rings is also very valuable, right? So you might want to buy the socket. So you can actually save up the sparks as long as you haven't jumped ahead. As long as you've gotten every splintered spark and you have not jumped ahead by buying that this week from that vendor, you can naturally get 2 sparks by the time this patch comes out, and you can have 2 crafted rings ready to go if that's the route you're going to go. You might already have a 447 ring. You might have the 447 ring from like Halls. That's really good. You might be playing Templar Strikes, and you have just like the high verse ring from the raid that's 444, and you're going to roll with that. There's some options that you have here. But yeah, overall that's my plan personally, because I don't have great rings right now. If I do some plus 20s and I get 447 in my vault of a good ring, like the Halls of Infusion ring for example, then I might stick with that over one of the crafted rings. But I am definitely, as far as right now, I'm definitely planning on crafting 2 of the rings. And that's where I stand on that. So I wanted to put this out there for everybody. Again, probably the biggest news is, even with the Iranog nerf, high-end 447 people will still be getting a little bit buff. Very slight, not a big buff. Heroic level players, kind of more like break even, we'll say. It might be a very, very tiny nerf or a very, very tiny buff. We'll say kind of break even for heroic players. And then we will say it's actually a nerf, unfortunately, to casual players. However, I doubt casual players had the Iranog ring, right, from Mythic, unless you went from playing hard to casual, which some people do. But the Onyx Amulet is most of your damage anyways. The Iranog ring was already not, magnificently ahead of the 447 rings on its own. whereas the Annulet was. So most of your damage loss is from the Annulet, which is why for a casual player, even if you don't have the Uranog ring, you're still going to feel probably a very, you know, it's not going to be a huge nerf, but it's going to be a bit of a nerf to you probably overall. If like you're playing with like 421 rings, 415 ring, 410 rings, whatever the case might be, you're going to feel a little bit of a nerf there probably. It was from this, especially going from that Onyx Annulet, which is like the same eye level, losing all that power. And honestly, the Onyx Annulet still might be stronger for you after this too. That's something worth simulating or trying out yourself and seeing how it feels or whatever. That if you're a casual player, you might actually just want to keep with the Onyx Annulet in general. So that's something to think about too. So that's it for this one, guys. Hopefully everyone's ready. Hopefully you have all your sparks lined up and stuff like that. If you're still caring about gearing out your character like I am, I'm always trying to get as close to the highest eye level as I can by the end of a patch. So yeah, hopefully everyone is set up to do so and set up to accept this change and, you know, go forward with it. And hopefully all the high end players are able to, you know, have a little bit of a buff going forward. You know, for Mythic Plus, for AoE, this is all pretty much not important because those rings already weren't good. You should have already had those rings replaced for Mythic Plus for the most part. I know there are some people using Annulet in Mythic Plus with the Storm Infused Stone and stuff still, but I don't necessarily think that was the play personally. I would probably say not to do that, but you know, who am I to tell someone doing it really high keys how to play? Or maybe their gear was just showing that they had it on from when they, you know, were raiding. They logged off after raid or something. But yeah, overall, it's not a huge deal, but I did want to kind of go over it. I broke down all the ability damage and I wanted to just share that it's still a very slight nerf if you are, or a slight buff, I'm sorry. It's still a very slight buff if you are, you know, working in the high eye level range. So that's it for this one, guys. As always, I do ask you to please subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a lot. And other than that, everybody, have a good one.